Well, hello to all of you who will watch this broadcast later on. You're not watching it live. My name is Corey. I am a husband, I'm a father, I'm a writer, a speaker, I host a podcast, and I host this live that you're watching right now. It's called Existential Sunday. And this space is simply a space for people who either are or have deconstructed their faith or their ideas about society. This is simply a space for you, where your questions are welcome, where your doubts are welcome. This is what this space is for. Any of us who have been through this journey of, I used to believe this, now I have questions about this, and now I just don't know, it's not pre-recorded, Angela. This is actually live. Okay. So those of you that are coming into the live broadcast, I am here live with you today. Feel free to share this broadcast. You guys know what to do. You don't have to ask me. You can share it right now. You can comment in the comments and tag people if you'd like. And if you're watching this later, again, it's not live for you. You can, as you watch, if you get to the end of this and you feel like, oh, this is important stuff that I want to share with my friends, you can hit the share button also. Share it on YouTube and share it on Facebook. So I'm going to say good morning to a couple people. Good morning, Ashley. Good morning, Jennifer. Good morning, Angela. Good morning to my beautiful wife, Julia, or Julia, as I call her. Welcome to all of you who are here this morning. I want to make sure that people can come in. All right. I want to make sure people are here before I start talking, because I don't want you to miss it. I think I feel like what I have to say is important, and I hope that I can say it the way that I feel it right now. So I'm going to take a sip of water, and then we're going to get started. But make sure you guys hit the share, like it and share it, like it and share it, like it and share it, and like it and share it. Okay. If you are a human being and you are watching what is happening currently in the world with a global pandemic that seems to not want to go away. I mean, we had heard from, I don't know who it was. I mean, everybody's an expert on, science and medicine all of a sudden since the pandemic started on social media. But we had heard that once it got hot outside, that it was going to go away. It hasn't gone away. So we are dealing with this global pandemic. And then also here in America and really around the world now, there's this uprising of movement, Black Lives Matter, right? We're seeing people rise up to resist the injustices that Black folks have been suffering for years. Okay. But in that tension is like a lot of polarization. It's a lot of back and forth. It's some arguments. Yesterday, I got up and I don't like waking up and going right to social media, especially my social media, because you just never know what kind of stuff you're going to find. But yesterday I woke up and I, after getting sleep out my eyes, and I don't know what I did first, but I eventually got to social media in the morning. And there were some comments from people who at one point probably considered me to be friends, and maybe still do consider me to be friends. But as I said yesterday, if you don't have Black friends, if you don't listen to them, period, they're not your friends. You don't have friends, period. If you don't listen to your friends when they are expressing their stories, sharing their experience, if you don't listen to them, they're not your friends. Anyway, I woke up to some comments that were just so infuriating and frustrating. And I'm like, I'm tired of it. Like, I'm tired of having to fight to prove something that should be pretty clear and obvious, that people who are facing difficult, oppressive, non-liberated existence have the right to live in freedom. That should not be hard. So in the midst of that, right, I'm looking at it from that perspective, but there are people who look at the world and go, man, I just really love to get back to the good old days. I would just really love to be in a time that's different than this. And they will say, why can't we just get back to the good old days? Now here, I want to talk about that for 15 minutes or so. I don't know how long it'll be, but I'm just going to talk about it till I make the point, and then I'm going to be done. And for those of you who have not seen Game of Thrones, the next 5 minutes or so, I will try to avoid any major spoilers, but there could be some spoilers, okay? And if you've not seen Game of Thrones by now, it's kind of your own fault, all right? So the reason I bring up Game of Thrones is because there is a storyline in Game of Thrones that is indicative of our time in America, where we're talking about like the stories that we tell and who has the power to tell the stories. There are two daughters in Game of Thrones who witnessed the beheading of their father. Their father's a just man, a good man, and for all intents and purposes should be the hero of the entire Game of Thrones story, but he's beheaded very early on in the story. And then throughout the later the seasons after this, you see the depiction of their father's beheading played out in front of them, dramatized in front of them by people of power. So the people who have power have written this story about their father that's not true, but it is a story that history tells, right? And it presents the king, who was an awful human being. I mean, like if you watch Game of Thrones, Joffrey, you could not wait until they killed him off. I mean, anyway, let me stay focused. Okay. So like it made Joffrey the hero, and it made these daughters, it made their father the villain, the stories that were told later on. And you see in one scene in particular, the youngest daughter is in some far off land, and they're dramatizing the story of her father being beheaded. And she watches what she witnessed in person, what she experienced. She watches the story being told in a very comedic way, and everyone's laughing except for her. She's the only one not laughing because she's the only one that understands that the way this story is being told is not actually the way the story actually went. She's the only one not laughing because she understands, and she has a connection to the injustice that took place so that these people could laugh now. And when I hear that, or when I see that, I'm reminded of something that Jesus said in one of in my favorite gospel. Before I tell you what Jesus said, let me just set a little bit more of the stage for why these words that Jesus said matter. And those of you that aren't Christians, again, this is I'm referencing Jesus for the sake of telling this story, not to tell you that you need to get baptized or saved, because that's not what I'm here to do. I need us all to understand what this word Messiah meant in the context of ancient Jewish people. The word Messiah now in America has this connotation to like, okay, I'm going to be saved from behaving badly. I'm going to be saved from being a bad partner to in my romantic relationships. I'm going to be saved from being a bad parent to my children. I'm going to be saved from being a bad coworker. Like all of those things. I'm going to be saved from bad behavior. But the reality of Savior in their context, or Messiah, I should say, in their context, was about a liberator, someone who was going to physically free people who were oppressed. In fact, one of the first times that the word Messiah is mentioned is in Isaiah, and it's not in reference to Jesus at all, but it's in reference to a foreign Persian king who was going to come and liberate the ancient Jewish people from their Babylonian captivity. All right, that being said, in Luke chapter 6, okay, you guys can go look at it later if you want to. I'm not going to read it, but it's in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6. There is Jesus basically preaching. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. And in this sermon, he's saying things like, blessed are you who are poor, for you will be rich. And then he goes on to say all these things, blessed are you who are persecuted, yada, yada, yada. What I want to call attention to is that further down in this sermon that Jesus is giving, he says, woe to you who are rich now, and woe to you who laugh now. Because to go back to the illustration with young Arya Stark, she is in the midst of people who are laughing now because they are living in a time where people who are unjust are ruling and are in charge, and they get to tell the story of the history of their realm, the history of men. Jesus shows up and says, Now is the time that all of this is about to change, right? All of you who are laughing now, you're laughing because you are in a position of power, and your position of power oppresses, crushes, and destroys the marginalized. So woe to you who are now laughing, because your laughter is about to turn to tears, because everything is about to change. This is the time period that we live in right now, where we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, we look at people taking to the streets, we look at, even in churches today, people having conversations about race, some good, some terrible, but it's happening. And what we're probably at a point right now where people who have benefited from the injustices that Black folks have suffered are starting to feel like, when can we just get back to the good old days? And here's what you're saying when you say, when can we get back to the good old days? You want to go back to the days when the only people who got to tell the story about what was happening in the world were the powerful people who were benefiting from the oppression of the weak. Mouth's dry, sorry. That's what the good, going back to the good old days is about, because when you think about the good old days, right? When was there a time, and this won't be new to any of you who are listening to this, when was there a time, certainly in America, where Black folks have good old days? When was there a time where Black men and women did not have to fear for their lives when they are out in public and when they are dealing with white authority? When has there ever been a time where that was the case? There hasn't been a time like that. And here is the punchline of the entire live. And when I'm done with this, you guys, if y'all, you guys can leave, because this is the punchline of the whole live. I'm giving you 12 minutes in, the punchline of the whole thing. People on the side of justice look forward to the good old days. And those on the side of oppression and injustice look back to the good old days. Let me say this again. People on the side of justice look forward to the good old days because we've not had them yet. People who are on the side of oppression and injustice look back to the good old days. And you may be inadvertently looking back to the good old days. So I'm not saying this to demonize you and say that you're an evil, wicked person. What I am saying to you is, what you don't know about the good old days is that they were good for you and your ancestors, but they were not good for me and mine. And so for days to actually be good, they have to be good for everyone, which is why this idea of the Messiah for the Jewish people was such a liberating idea, because the Messiah was going to liberate the world. The Messianic age would be an age where there is liberation for all, not even just humans, but liberation for the planet, liberation for all the creatures who creep on the planet, a day where there'd be no more war, no more violence, no more hierarchy. That is a Messianic age where everyone, the orphan, the widow, the Black, the brown, all people would live in harmony and peace with one another and the planet that God created. This was the idea of the Messianic age. In fact, so much so that when Mary, in Luke's gospel that he writes, when Mary finds out, this Palestinian teenager finds out that she's pregnant with the Messiah, her first words in her song called Mary's Song, or the Magnificat, the words are, "My soul magnifies the Lord," but she goes on to say that the mighty will be pulled down from their thrones. That she talks about powerful people having a reversal of fortune now that the Messiah has come to liberate those who are oppressed. The good news shows up to the oppressed people. And Mary's like, oh yeah, finally. Oh yeah, now, like, the oppression that we've been living under because of the people who are rich and powerful and unjust, now Joffrey's finally going to die, for the Game of Thrones fans. This is what that looks like. It looks like Arya Stark saying, oh, finally, these people on my list, like, something has happened, something has changed, and now I have hope that the people who have been holding us back, the people who have been oppressing us and overtaxing us and killing our bodies, those people are about to be pulled down from power, and there's now a liberation that's going to flow in the streets. And right now in America, we're seeing liberation flowing in the streets. We're seeing Confederate statues come down, and people are like, yes, but other people, because they're hankering for the good old days that were behind them, because they benefited from oppression, are like, don't take down the statue of my ancestor. Let's not cancel that history. That history is oppressive. In fact, some people are so connected and so attached to what it feels like to be on top, what it feels like to not have to think about anyone else, that when earlier this week, when Sean King dared suggest that Jesus was not white, people claim that he was trying to cancel Jesus. Now let's understand this for a moment, okay? I need us to understand this. I've said this to y'all before. This isn't new to anybody who's been a part of this. Again, if you're just joining, welcome. My name's Corey. Feel free to like and share this post. You can do it right now if you want to. But this is what I need to make sure that we all understand. Jesus, historically, the Jesus who lived here on planet Earth in history, was a Jewish man. Fact. This should not be hard. But people are so connected to their European idea of God and their European idea of Jesus that when the suggestion or when the fact is stated that Jesus is Jewish, they feel like you're trying to cancel Jesus, because to cancel white Jesus is to cancel Jesus altogether. Let that sink in for a moment. The idea that Jesus is not white for people in America, and certainly I saw someone share some video on the Fox News folks talking about this, that a Black Lives Matter leader wanted to cancel Jesus. Let's understand that for them, the idea that Jesus isn't white means that there's no Jesus at all. This is why we have to be mindful and resolute that we've never had good old days. That people of color and the allies to people of color, and certainly any person who considers themselves to be a part of the movement of Jesus, has to be on the side. There's no gray area here. Has to be on the side of forward movement. In fact, Jesus said something that's really interesting. He said, no person who puts their hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. In other words, is fit for the messianic age where everyone is in harmony with one another. Anybody who's looking back to the times of oppression is not fit for a time when Jesus says everyone will live in harmony and there will be no more war, because war is about people trying to grasp for power and hierarchy. Jesus says there'll be no more of that. So anyone who's looking back to the days where you gained power through oppression instead of gaining power through justice, anyone who's looking back to those days is not fit to be a part of this new thing that's coming into the world. And this is what people are identifying themselves as today when they're saying, let's get back to the good old days. You are saying you are not fit for the age to come where people will live in harmony in the messianic age, the true messianic age, where we make heroes out of every person, out of every people group, and not just out of the powerful who've oppressed their way to the top. And now they're frustrated because Black folks can now tell their own stories. You're not upset about Black Lives Matter. You're upset because for the first time in your life, your heroism is decentered. You're not upset because Robert E. Lee's statue is coming down. You don't even have no Robert E. Lee statues in your house. You're upset because the first time in your life, you are not the hero of the story. And there was another person, for those of you who are Christians or come from the Christian tradition, there's another story of a person who had their heroism decentered And there's a story where a teacher of the law comes to Jesus. Many of you have heard this story. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I want to make a point of it. A teacher of the law comes to Jesus and he says, how do I enter into this kingdom you're talking about? How do I become a part of this thing that you're talking about? Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then the scripture says that the man seeking to justify himself says, who is my neighbor? And we all, if you've been a part of church before, you know the rest of the story goes. There was this story of a man who on his way from Jericho to Jerusalem got beat up and left on the side of the road. A priest comes walking by, sees the man, doesn't go near him. A Levite comes walking by, sees the man and doesn't go near him. And then this last part, I need you to understand Jesus in his context. I'll say this really quickly. Jesus in his context is a rabbi who's telling familiar stories. This is not a new story Jesus is telling necessarily. This is a familiar story. He would use rabbinic stories and poems to make a point. In this story that Jesus tells, the expectation of everyone listening is that the next person to walk down this road from Jericho to Jerusalem would be a Jewish person who would ultimately be the hero of the story. Jesus flips the whole thing on its head and says, actually, the hero of this story is a Samaritan. Why does he choose a Samaritan? Because Jesus is all about disrupting the status quo. The status quo for Jewish folks was that we are going to be, though we are oppressed, in our stories that we tell, the hero of our religion is going to be this Jewish devout follower of the Torah. Jesus goes, nah, it's actually a Samaritan. And just everyone is just like incensed when they hear this, because Jesus does this a lot. He's always pressing us to evaluate who we deem to be a hero, who we deem to be welcome. So in our context today in America, the likelihood is that Jesus told the Good Samaritan story today, it would the hero in that story would likely be a queer, Black, non-binary. It would probably be that. It would probably be the person who represents the most marginalized, the least likely for anyone in religion to think those people belong. It would be that person. It would be the gay person who church people have put out to pasture and said, you can't be a part of our gathering. That's who Jesus would center as the hero. And this is what we're discovering. And this is why so many religious folks in particular are having a very hard time with what is happening right now in the world, that we are making space for people who traditionally have not had space. So you have to move over now to allow somebody to sit on the front row who wasn't even allowed in church or wasn't even allowed in your space to begin with. So now you just want to get back to the good old days when we just oppressed people we didn't like. We need to get back to the good old days where people didn't have a voice to speak up for themselves. The good old days where men could just grab women on their butts and nobody would say anything about it because that's just how men behaved. The good old days when you didn't have to sit next to someone Black in school. The good old days when Black folks just lived under so much oppression that we couldn't even speak up about it. The good old days of slavery, when there was just this unity. Right? There we had unity because Black folks weren't marching the street saying Black Lives Matter then, because what would we do? We'd kill them. They put them down. Like Donald Trump said, in the good old days, you know what we would do to someone like that? I need you to understand this today. All right. And then I'm about to be done with this. I need you to understand that if you are a person watching this, I beg of you, if you're a person watching this who has been hankering for and looking backwards to the good old days, you are on the wrong side of history, my friend. You are hankering and desiring. This isn't just white folks. I know some Black folks that hanker for the good old days. This is what happened to the Jewish people and the Hebrew people in the wilderness was, can we get this new way of living where we're moving towards liberation is harder. This is hard. We don't like it. Can we just go back to Egypt? It was better there. This is not just something that plagues people who are oppressors. This plagues any people that are willing to do the hard work of saying, let's go forward to the good old days, because they're not behind us. They're only ever in front of us. All right, folks. That's all I have. If you've watched this for 25 minutes, especially if you're watching the replay, you watch 25 minutes of this, I would imagine that this is something that you want to share with your friends and family. And I don't say that so that, I don't need to tell you why. I do need to tell you why I say that. I say that because I think what we're talking about is so important. And I struggle to even say that out loud, because I'm not the kind of person who touts that I'm so great. But what I am saying is that I believe what I felt today, the fire that burns in these conversations, I believe they need to be heard. I think people need to grasp these things. I think you have friends who need to hear it. And that's why I encourage you to share it. So if you've not shared it, do so, but you ain't got to. All right. Thank you for all of you who are part of the Patreon community. The link to that should be in the comments here below the Facebook, and it'll also be below the YouTube. So if you're not a part of that community yet, and you'd like to be, the link is there so you can join. Thank you to all of you who are already a part of that community. I appreciate your support. I appreciate you joining us in this work we're doing to contend for a better world. And I just thanks to all of you who watched it. Grace and peace to all of you until next time.